Of the 45 men who served as United States President, 15 did not attend the inauguration ceremonies of their successors. In half of the cases, it was the result of the president dying while in office and being succeeded by their vice president. However, in the other 7 cases, the presidents didn't attend the ceremony by choice. The first not to do so was John Adams, who was only the nation's second president. He didn't attend the inauguration of his successor, Thomas Jefferson. It was the first time power had been passed from a president of one political party to a president of another party. While George Washington was technically independent of any political party, he's been considered a Federalist in all but name. John Adams was also a Federalist, and Washington attended his inauguration. The transfer of power from Adams to Jefferson was not only from one party, the Federalist, to another, the Democratic Republicans, but it was also after a long, vicious election cycle that was full of not only exaggerated political attacks, but also targeted personal ones. There is no concrete reason why Adams didn't attend. Some suggest that he wasn't invited. Others suggest he wanted to leave the Capitol early in the morning to complete the trip back to his home state in Massachusetts in a timely manner. But generally, it's agreed that the animosity that had built up between the two parties had something to do with it. 28 years later, the nation would see the next unfriendly transition. Ironically, it was with single-term President John Quincy Adams, son of John Adams, who didn't attend the inauguration of his successor, Andrew Jackson. It was the first time since John Adams that power was being transferred from one party to another. Thomas Jefferson's 3 successors, James Madison, James Monroe, and John Quincy Adams, had all been Democratic Republicans, whereas Andrew Jackson was a Democrat. But once again, it wasn't simply a switch of parties that caused the animosity, but also the ruthless election cycle. Supporters of Adams saw Jackson as an uncouth, unhinged outsider who had to be kept out of the White House at all cost. The personal attacks on Jackson knew no bounds, attacking his character and the character of his wife. Jackson's wife, Rachel, died only weeks after the election, which Jackson attributed to the anxiety brought on by the personal attacks. After Jefferson's election, 28 years earlier, Adams and Jefferson had at least met in the White House in the following February, but there was no such meeting between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. On the evening prior to Jackson's inauguration, Adams had already left the White House. 12 years later came the third transfer of power between parties and the third time a president wouldn't attend his successor's inauguration. After Jackson's 2 terms, his acolyte and fellow Democrat Martin Van Buren served only a single term before being voted out in favor of the nation's first Whig president, William Henry Harrison. Van Buren didn't attend Harrison's inauguration, but the reason isn't as clear. There are a few theories. Some say it was once again due to drama from the election, in which the Harrison campaign smeared Van Buren's character. Others say it was less about animosity between Van Buren and Harrison and more about the tense relationship between Van Buren and other Whig politicians. A likely reason, regardless, was that Van Buren was eager to see his son, who had been seriously ill. Unlike Jackson and Quincy Adams, Van Buren and Harrison did meet together in the White House the February prior to the inauguration. Despite the precedent that had seemingly been set, presidents of different parties would attend their successors' inaugurations going forward. John Tyler, who was technically independent, attended the inauguration of James K. Polk, a Democrat, and then later James Buchanan, a Democrat, attended the inauguration of Republican Abraham Lincoln. Problems arose again between Lincoln's successor, Andrew Johnson, and his successor, Ulysses S. Grant. It was once again the passage of power from one party to another, but that doesn't adequately explain the animosity between Johnson and Grant. The Civil War had fractured the nation in more ways than Union and Confederacy. While Johnson and Grant were both ardent Unionists, they had very different ideas of how the nation should handle Reconstruction. Despite their ideological differences, the two initially were willing to work together in the midst of more radical factions. But Grant soured towards Johnson over the course of his presidency. Their ideological differences no doubt came to a head, but things became so bitter largely due to the clash of personalities. Grant seen Johnson as a crass, cruel, and vindictive man who demeaned the office of the presidency. Johnson, for his part, was already in a storm of enemies as he fought with radical Republicans. Initially, he saw Grant as his ally, and then he saw Grant's turn as a betrayal. After Grant's election, Johnson's cabinet members wanted Johnson to reconcile with Grant enough to attend the inauguration ceremony. But Johnson held to his position, calling Grant, quote, a liar, guilty of duplicity, false to his duty and his trust. For his inauguration, Grant announced ahead of time that he refused to ride in the same carriage as Johnson, which further sealed Johnson's choice. Rather than leaving the White House early, Johnson effectively stayed until the very last minute, even while the ceremony was taking place. It took until 50 years later, in the early 20th century, for another president to willingly not attend the inauguration of his successor, though willingly is a bit more ambiguous in this case. Democrat Woodrow Wilson didn't attend the inauguration of Warren G. Harding, a Republican, but this might have come down to health reasons. During his second term, Wilson had a stroke. He'd spent the final years of his presidency mostly behind closed doors and severely limited in his mobility. While he did perform the traditional ride to the Capitol with the incoming president, he did not attend the inauguration ceremony. The next time came in the second half of the century when Richard Nixon didn't attend the ceremony for Gerald Ford. Both Nixon and Ford were Republicans, so this marked the first time a president of the same political party as the incoming president didn't attend the inauguration. It was also the first time a president was being replaced intra-term despite being alive. Nixon resigned in late 1974, less than 2 years into his second term, and was being succeeded by his vice president. Any other time such a transition took place, it was because the president had died. Exhausted and tormented by the Watergate scandal, which had brought about his resignation, Nixon had already left the White House when Ford was being sworn in. Most recently, Republican Donald Trump didn't attend the inauguration of his successor, Democrat Joe Biden. It took Trump 2 months after the election to concede defeat. The same day, he also announced that he wouldn't attend the inauguration. Biden later made a statement saying he was glad Trump wasn't attending. Subscribe to see more videos like this on United States presidents in the future. If you'd like to show your support for the channel and have your name featured in the credits, you can make a donation on Patreon of either $2, $5, or $15 a month. Patreon link in the description below.